in Baltimore and hitting the rocks here in the middle of the season in Chicago and coming back home to play the Cardinals this weekend, as well as Ravens minicamp and the addition of Jeremy Maclin this week. But we have not talked a whole lot of residue of what was just as impressive a run to a championship, minus a shot or two in Game 4. The Golden State Warriors, I don't know, a team for the ages, dynasty, whatever you want to call this at this point. But I know one thing, we're going to call him the 2017 NBA champ. Steve Kyler is here. He has witnessed it all. He covers the NBA in its totality for Basketball Insiders. You can find him out at B-Ball Insiders on Twitter, as well as at Steve Kyler NBA, and that is Kyler. He is one of our defending champions. And, dude, what is there not to praise about the way this team conducts itself, plays basketball, and has for the better part of 3 years?
Yeah, it's a special team. And, like you said, they're on the verge of something really historic because not only is this team really good right now, but think about it. These guys are still in kind of their middle 20s. All of them are under 28. There's a lot of runway here for this team, not only to continue forward. A lot of guys under contract. The guys that aren't are going to be under new contracts here in about 2 weeks. And this team's not going anywhere. So it really has the makings for something special. And when you look at it, just the sheer dominance that they have across their first 5 players is impressive. And the fact that Kevin Durant's probably going to help them out a little bit this summer and keep all of that core together, including some of the bench guys. This Warrior team not only is special because of how unselfish they are, but special because they play really well together, and it's an exciting brand of basketball.
For you, with them winning, there could be no shock in this, right? I mean, was there ever a point during the season or during the series or during the playoffs where you really believed the Cleveland Cavaliers were going to beat them 4 times in 7 nights this year?
Well, in all honesty, I did pick the Cavaliers in 6. I thought what we saw in Game 4 was going to be a lot more of what we were going to see in the series. And I think what we saw in Game 5 was probably more enigmatic of what we should have seen in the series. But look, this Warrior team is incredible, and there were a lot of things that made them incredible. They were the front runners for sure, but for me, I really felt like LeBron was going to have a super special, run and maybe get the repeat. And I think if you look at it, he did have a very special, postseason, especially averaging a triple-double in the NBA Finals. That's an amazing thing. The problem with LeBron is his guys didn't step up to the challenge. Kyrie Irving did, but a lot of the other guys, especially guys making big money, really didn't start to show up until Game 4.
Well, this really isn't a dissimilar story than when Cleveland used to lose before, right? Like, it was LeBron and who are the rest of these guys, which is the reason he went to Miami to begin with. And I'll say this about LeBron, when his team should win, when he's got the best team, they win. I didn't think they had the best team last year, quite frankly. I think that parade in Cleveland, I don't want to say they're on borrowed time, and I don't want to be disrespectful. I just think if these teams played 7-game series from now through the end of 2019, the Warriors would win 90 or 95% of them. I really believe that.
Yeah, and you're not wrong in that. When you've got 2 MVPs that are incredibly complementary players on the same roster together, and they don't have to take away from each other to be great, that's when you've got the special. When you look at Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, what made that so great was neither guy had to put any portion of their game in their pocket in order to be great. They were the 1-2 punch. Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant. They had their differences, but they were a great 1-2 punch. And I think you've seen that historically, that the teams that really have the it have that complementary superstar. And the problem for LeBron, again, is, look, Kevin Love wasn't incredibly good in this series. Tristan Thompson wasn't incredibly good in this series. These are guys that you're paying, in Kevin Love's case, $20-something million to, in Tristan Thompson's case, $15, $16 million. When you've got $36 million of $100 million salary cap not producing, but when you flip the script and go over to the Warriors, when every dollar is productive, that's why you get kind of this runaway team, is because there's not a lot on that roster that's costing them money, that's not being super productive or really maybe playing above their pay grade.
For you, Steve, when the addition happened last year, and look, you and I spent 2.5 years discussing, him coming home and playing for the Wizards. And, maybe if that happens, it would have been Wizards Warriors, and maybe the Wizards would have had a chance had that been the decision of Durant. But it wasn't, and he made this decision. It was universally panned by the people that don't want to see a super team. At least he didn't call the press conference and talk about taking his talents to the East Bay or whatever. But I think that it is natural to say when superstars come together in other sports and other places, it doesn't always work out this well. Steinbrenner tried to buy championships for 30 years, worked out a little bit at the end, but there is a chemistry part of this. But it seems to me in the NBA, when guys of that ilk have moved around and chosen their spot, that's how you win in the NBA if you're a superstar player. You pick a place where there's already some other guys who you like, who you can get along with, and that doesn't always work out. I mean, let's be honest. LeBron kind of has a hand-picked team around him, right? I mean, kind of has a hand-picked coach, hand-picked teammates, and it still hasn't really worked out because you could say he picked guys or whatever. They're still not the better team because this Warriors thing happened to begin with, and then you add Durant into this. But I think a year ago when this happened last summer, there were definitely some people thinking, well, maybe this won't work, right? I mean, and it did work.
Well, a couple of things. One, kind of keep in mind, I always say this is, very few times in basketball do you get a chance to really choose. You don't get to choose the team that drafts you. You can try to do this Lonzo Ball thing and steer teams away from you, but you don't get to choose. And then the first time your contract comes around, you're offering you $100 million and you're 23, you're taking that money. The first chance that Kevin really got to make a decision for Kevin was this last year, and it was a hard decision, but he did make the decision where he felt like, look, I want to make my life a little bit easier. I want to have fun doing this every day. I want to play with guys that I genuinely enjoy being around every day. And that was an unusual thing. But again, I think we saw it with LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh getting together. It's one of the reasons LeBron talks about wanting to play with Carmelo Anthony and Chris Paul and Dwayne Wade. More fun to play with guys and have success with guys you really like away from the game. Too many times it's a shotgun wedding in sports that a GM picked this guy or we traded for that guy. It's very rare that the world lines up quite the way that it did for the Warriors, where you had this amazing team, you had an MVP on a super low dollar contract, you had a cap spike that created this huge space to go get it, and a willingness of everybody to make it work. That is a rare occurrence that I don't think we'll ever see again in basketball for a lot of reasons. But, this team was special because of the uniqueness of the circumstance. And as much as everybody kind of says, oh, super teams are bad, keep in mind, the Warriors drafted Steph Curry. They drafted Klay Thompson. They drafted Draymond Green. The only real free agents were kind of some of their bench guys, Andre Iguodala. They traded away the world to create salary cap space for him. Sean Livingston was 2 years removed from not being in the NBA when they signed him. So they took a lot of risks to build this team. Draymond Green was a second-round pick. Klay Thompson was, the 11th pick. Steph Curry wasn't the top pick, and he had all kinds of ankle problems. So there were a lot of chances.
Well, they did import Bogut, too. I mean, he was a guy, from the first time around.
Yeah, and trade for him. If you think about it, Andrew Bogut was injured and had this big balloon of a contract and hadn't been able to play a season. So, you look at what the Warriors had been able to do, and it really is the recipe for you have to draft incredibly smart in the NBA. You have to be willing to take risks where, most people didn't want Draymond Green because of his attitude, his size, and, all the things that you see on display that you'll call the negatives of Draymond Green. Klay Thompson, there were a lot of negatives about Klay Thompson. So sometimes it's about being able to take maybe the not so bright diamonds, lump them together and make something beautiful. And that's really what the Warriors did. And a lot of it came together because they were so bad for so long that success started to happen. And then they were positively reinforced to be unselfish, because as soon as they got unselfish, they started to win. As soon as they won, they all started to get paid. So there wasn't a lot of me-first stuff that happened with this group because of how it all lined up. And I think that's what makes it an even more special story, because even like Miami, it was a battle of egos there. You think about, some of those Laker teams, especially when they went and got Dwight Howard and Steve Nash and, all the things they're still paying for today. Those weren't good things because those weren't good guys.
Well, doesn't
Good guys that
LeBron
got
bring
better.
like a requisite amount of drama sort of wherever he goes? Isn't that like that's part of the deal, right? And, the Warriors have managed to, by and large, avoid a lot of drama. And, if Curry's anything, they call him boring or, and all, maybe a little bit aloof or whatever it is at this point. But, he's got his kid bouncing on his lap at press conferences. I mean, it feels like a happy family. And I'll tell you, Steve, I went out to Golden State back in November, and I'm just an outside guy who had a friend who needed a favor. We're out there to save some lives, and my wife, and to celebrate life a little bit. They couldn't have been any kinder to us. And more than that, there was just no arrogance around the franchise. I mean, it made me want to be a fan. It made me want to come back. And I don't know that I would have had that vibe being around the LeBron Heat or the LeBron Cavaliers. I mean, I don't think it rolls that way around there, does it?
It really doesn't. And again, you mentioned, the Warriors are a very special organization. And I think it's because, look, all of this success, while it's been around for a couple of years, has never been who the Warriors were. The Chris Cohen Warriors were dreadful. I mean, that was an awful dumpster fire of an organization. So, these guys haven't really figured out how to be arrogant yet. I think the most arrogance you'll get is Draymond Green, and he's arrogant in a funny way, not in a negative way, but you hit it on the head, with LeBron James and, really from the day the Cavaliers made it clear they were drafting him, he's been the guy that's had a circle of guys and power and influence that very few players have had. And then you factor in that, his agent is a good friend and he runs his own business. He's got his own thing. It's going to be LeBron's way. And we haven't really seen a player with this much clout and power in a very long time. Even Michael Jordan didn't have it because, frankly, Jerry Krause and Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner of the Bulls, just weren't going to allow it.
Well, Jordan also had to earn it. He didn't come out as the number one kid when he was 17 years old, and everybody was chasing him around Akron when he was 15 and 14. I mean, he's Michael Jackson. He was sort of born into this, right?
No question. And, handled and manipulated and marketed from day one, and it's probably why he'll be one of the first basketball players to earn $1 billion, in terms of his career. And, it's an amazing thing to see, but it does when you contrast kind of where each organization is at in terms of the Warriors and all their get-along guys and the LeBron Cavaliers with a you're going to do it LeBron's way. Here's the funny thing about all this, and we'll hear more about this in the coming weeks, is what do the Cavs do going forward? LeBron's got the juice because of how he has structured his contract to say, look, they all got to go. I want new guys. And it wouldn't be out of character for that to happen. I don't think you'd ever see Steph Curry do that. I don't think you'd ever see, Kevin Durant do that. But it's not out of character for a LeBron James to say, need new guys, go get me new guys. And that'd be a real demand of the organization. And then what do the Cavs do? Do they try to stand up to LeBron? They haven't done it yet.
He is Steve Kyler, and Steve Kyler NBA out on Twitter as well as at basketballinsiders.com, and B-Ball Insiders out on Twitter, covering all things NBA and doing a formal wrap. And, I guess it would have been a little more special had they stolen Game 4, right? And I don't know where you stand on the officiating there and the technical foul and Draymond. I mean, dude, that guy has 8 T's a game if he's bitching about, officiating, but it was called that way, and it's certainly smelled like 2-day-old fish to me, man.
Yeah, I'm a bit different on the officiating, and maybe it's because I know so many officials, and I do spend time around the officiating leadership, and I listen to how they view the world. These guys, especially the officials, they're officiating for their lives. If you don't maintain a certain proficiency level from scoring, you're out. You're out. And, these guys are trying to make their career too, and they're trying to advance within their world. And certainly you can go, well, the NBA will take care of them, but historically that's not been the case. And I like this now. You saw it in the broadcast. Jeff Van Gundy, can be very critical of the NBA, how frequently they commented,
that was a good call, or they went back at something and said, was it really? Yeah, it was. And you can see in the slow motion that most of these things are exactly what they are perceived to be. But there's no question the NBA got a little on itself with the whole technical foul stuff in Game 4. But a lot of times that's the official, saying something to the scorer and the scorer not logging it correctly. And that's exactly what that was. It should have been caught earlier. There's going to be checks and balance reviews because there is a process in place to check that clearly wasn't followed. But I think when you look at the way the Cavaliers played, they owned that game from the intensity point of view. So it would have been different to me if they weren't so intense and running away with it and they still win the game. It's like, that's when I start to look at it funny and say, like you said, 2-day-old fish. When the better team loses the game, then you start to go, hey, what's going on? The better team won Game 4, and you saw in Game 5. Cavs were incredibly competitive right down to the fourth quarter, and that's what you wanted to see. I was concerned we were going to get caught up in this 16-0 Warriors thing, greatest team ever, what is LeBron's legacy? Both of those storylines go out of the way because this thing did get competitive. So to me, that's what I'm always looking for. Let's compete.
Well, the LeBron legacy thing is still in progress, and as long as this team is sitting there out in the East Bay, he's going to have a hard time winning a championship. I mean, I don't know that it could have been set up any better this year, right? They coast, he sits down, he rests, they finish second, but it doesn't matter, and they make quick work of just about everybody, and he gets the extra days in. Had there been a Game 6 or a Game 7, it would have been a more rested version. He certainly looked very healthy, very spry, very strong to the end, but it was the pieces around him. And look, I'm not a LeBron guy. I'll never be a LeBron guy, right? And I'm just not. I mean,
it's okay. You don't have to be.
Well, it drips with arrogance to me, and I've dealt with Golden State, so therefore, I've got the good guy in the back. I got the baby face in this, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm in the market to buy a gold throwback Golden State Warrior Rick Barry era logo with the little state in the basketball thing. I'm gonna buy a Golden State Warriors jersey. That's how I feel about them. But let me say this on LeBron. I see him getting beaten up. I'm not going to sit here and beat him up as a basketball player. I'll beat up the decision. I'll beat up the running to Miami and circling yourself to win a championship, and it would have meant a whole lot more had he stayed back in Cleveland for his detractors, and I know he has his fans as well. But I can't beat up going to the finals every year, and sometimes you win. And it'd be different if he would have lost with the better team. He's never lost with the better team, so I think he sort of has a built-in excuse.
Yeah, and I would say this too, is, look, I get the people who are saying, he's been to 8 NBA finals, only come away with 2 rings. Getting to 8 NBA finals is amazing. And it being 8 NBA finals in a row.
It's kind of like crapping on Jim Kelly or something, right? I mean, what are you doing, right?
It's incredible what LeBron has done. And, his legacy, he's done. He's in the Hall of Fame. I don't think, he's trying to write pages in the memoir now. There's certainly that and chasing championships. But he's in a great situation to continue. Look, even if the Cavs just bring back exactly who they have, they're probably in the finals again next year, and we'll call it Volume 4. And it's can somebody get better? Can they find somebody to add? Look, I think the Cavs are going to make a bold change because I think they need to. But, LeBron has done so many things, and I agree with you. There are many things about LeBron, the person, especially early on in his career, that I'll co-sign, that, what was he thinking? But who he's become since returning to Cleveland has become a lot better. He's a much more rounded professional. And I do remind people, look, LeBron James and Michael Jordan won their first championships at basically the same age. So it takes pros a while to get that first chip. It's hard to win a championship. And the fact that the Warriors have been able to do it so quickly in their young career lines them up to be historically special if they can stay healthy. LeBron's running into the same problem Larry Bird ran into, which is Magic Johnson wasn't giving up the chip either. Steph Curry and Kevin Durant they're coming for you. So you better bring your A game and get a couple of guys to come play with you. And that's really what's on LeBron. How aggressive does he do that? Because look, there's a fun scenario here, right? Carmelo Anthony and the New York Knicks are destined to break up. They talked about a Kevin Love deal at the trade deadline. You make that happen.
Chris Paul is going to be a free agent this summer. Do you trade Kyrie Irving and Amon Shumpert for Chris Paul? And now you got Chris Paul, LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony. Let's go see if we can get that one done. It can happen because of who LeBron is and all of this. So there's some fun that'll play out here, and it could get absolutely that silly in the arms race to try to dethrone the Golden State Warriors.
Thank God the season's over and you can relax and sit around for a couple of months with nothing to do, right, Steve?
My man, we got the draft, we got Summer League, 2 Summer League, 3 Summer Leagues this year, a huge free agent class, and like I said, who knows what LeBron's going to do. So no rest for the wicked.
Hey, man, you said to me something really funny. I had to write it down. You said, it's hard to win a championship. And I'm thinking, does he know he's talking to a Washington Capitals fan here and a Baltimore Orioles fan and a Washington Wizards?
It is hard to win a championship. Think about it. There are still franchises in the NBA, and what are we? I think we're at 68 seasons, 69 seasons of NBA basketball. That the fact that there are still franchises that have never been to an NBA Finals, that have never had a shot at winning an NBA Finals. There's so many championships that were matched between the Celtics and the Lakers. It's a rare thing to be an NBA champion, let alone to get 2 of them. So, it's tough.
Last thing for you, and I guess this is for everyone else in the league. You can't help if you've watched the Wizards play 40 or 50 times like I have this year. Really kind of got into it this year and, was watching a whole lot more NBA on the off nights with the Caps in the winter, and I was around, and my wife wasn't in the hospital this winter, so there was time on my hands. And, and you watch them, and then you watch the playoffs, and you sort of get into it a little bit. I was up in Toronto when the Caps were playing the Maple Leafs, and, the Raptors were still talking about things, as were the Hawks, as were the Celtics. And you measure all these teams, and you watch Golden State play for a week or two, and you're like, yeah, good luck with that. You know what I mean? Like for the rest of the league, and even places like Washington where you feel like you're kind of close. I mean, the only close I can make them out to be is, like I said, if Durant would have came here last year, maybe something interesting would have happened. But it didn't work out that way, and it's not going to work out that way in the offseason. And all these other teams wind up, and I'll use this a metaphor. They're moving the chairs around on the Titanic. I mean, they're going down. It's just a matter of who they're going to go down with, right?
But again, I would say look at the Golden State Warriors. 4 years ago, this team was like, wow, you gave that much money to Steph Curry and all those ankle problems. And 4 years later, they're 2-time champions. And it does take, Steph Curry at the time wasn't even a top 25 player, let alone an MVP. So, sometimes it just needs to work your way. And for the Wizards specifically, the next step that John Wall took this year was impressive. The step that Brad Beal took this year was impressive. Otto Porter was impressive. You get one more guy, and those guys take one more big step forward. Now you're the Warriors in the East, and it's called the Wizards, and you got your shot because the Wizards have that. They've got their superstar in John Wall. They've got their second superstar in Brad Beal. They got their, third star in Otto Porter. The question is, can they go find their Kevin Durant or somebody that's really going to make them special? And I think they've got the chance to. Just got to be patient with it sometimes. So, maybe moving, Toronto has to make the $200 million investment in a team that probably didn't get out of the East. Wizards are in a much better situation because their window lines up better.
Steve Kerr special, huh? I mean,
very much.
We don't get, we don't talk enough about him around here. And, I spent 20 minutes with the guy the day after Trump got elected when he went nuts at the press conference and then came over and spent some, I'm a part of sports. I've been doing this all of my adult life since I was 15 years old. For 32 years, all I've done is hang out with coaches from hockey to football to baseball. I'm not around a lot of basketball coaches. I do know there's special people from the collegiate side of things. And even in the years I covered Jim Lynam's team or I covered Kevin Lockery's team and I see Gene Shue or I run into a Bob Ferry. I mean, some of the old school guys in my area. But, boy, Steve Kerr was just such an impressive guy. And I think he sort of gets lost in the shuffle in all of this, even despite his illness, right?
Yeah, an amazing person, incredibly nice person, let alone being really good at what he does. And remember, he's a pretty good basketball player in his own right as well. Great shooter. But, look, Steve Kerr, I think Scotty Brooks kind of fits into that. Dell Dents and used the GM down
in New Orleans. These are just like great people. And the fact that great people get an opportunity to have this kind of success, sometimes in sports we see the worst of people have success, and you're like, I hate that. I was really happy for Steve Kerr last night. You could see he's reluctant to have the spotlight make it about him, and tries to be self-deprecating in all of it. But it's an amazing thing to see somebody that special as a person get this opportunity, and no question, incredibly underrated for what he brings to the equation for that team.
Hey, man, always a pleasure to visit with you, and I know you got summer leagues and drafts, and we'll catch back up before it's all over with. But, keep the flame burning for the NBA here. I'm sure, the summer will get a little slow, and LeBron will have some sort of drama with him before it's all over with. It'll be fine.
Absolutely, no question.
There he is, Steve Kyler. NBA is the way to follow him. A nice, chunky post-championship segment there on some Golden State Warriors with a guy who does a great job at it, Basketball Insiders, and it's Steve Kyler. That's Kyler NBA. You can find me out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile devices. Download the TuneIn Radio app. We're here all week and all weekend. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and releasing Chapter 5 of the Peter Principles out at WNST.net. We are WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.